Is LSU in danger of losing 5 stars Lamar Brown and Richard Anderson? Signing day is here, and there is a ton of drama. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below, so thank you sincerely for that, and thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Well, Lane Kiffin was hired on Sunday, introduced on Monday, and on Tuesday, the signing class that LSU has had in place for some time now started to see a little bit of tumult. And LSU's recruiting coordinator, Frank Wilson, is in the middle of a lot of conversations that will delve into all of that here on this episode. So you know everything that you need to know here as signing day is upon us and what we're keeping an eye on throughout the day. Let's just start with the biggest news, which is that 5 stars, LSU's 2 5-star commitments, 2 defensive linemen, Lamar Brown, who's the #1 player in the country, and Richard Anderson out of Edna Carr in New Orleans, who is the #1 defensive tackle in the country, both will not sign with LSU on Wednesday, or are at least not expected to sign with LSU on Wednesday. Now, I Tuesday morning at LouisianaSports.net was the first to report that Richard Anderson would not be signing. I'll share that report with you here, which is that on Tuesday morning, there was a phone call with Lane Kiffin, Blake Baker, Richard Anderson, and Richard Anderson's representatives. Remember, all of these student athletes, they have agents now. Agents, accredited agents can represent student athletes. So these are deals, these are a lot of times high dollar deals. And so they have representation. And that phone call took place on Tuesday morning. And as I was told, Richard Anderson asked 2 questions of Lane Kiffin. Number 1, who is his defensive line coach going to be? And number 2, was Frank Wilson going to be on staff? And Kiffin didn't know the answer to either of those yet. So subsequent, the decision was made with Anderson, with his head football coach at Edna Carr, Bryce Brown, and his representation, that he would not sign on Wednesday. And as I was told, it doesn't mean he's flipping, doesn't mean he's signing with another school, but as I was told, Anderson will use December to build the relationship with the staff, see how the staff settles. Is Frank on staff? Who the defensive line coach will be? And then he'll visit in January and make his final decision, sign his financial aid agreement, and start school. So he will be a mid-year enrollee, but effectively you no longer sign a national letter of intent, right? So it's just a financial aid agreement. So with the LSU spring semester beginning in the middle of January, Richard Anderson can just basically enroll in school and sign his financial aid paperwork, but he'll have an opportunity to do that when the dead period lifts, and he can go visit with the coaching staff in person. Every Tuesday, timing worked out well here, we visit with Shea Dixon from On3, the Bengal Tiger. And Shea, as I say often, is as good as it comes with recruiting. And so I asked Shea about this. This was after my report, but before the Lamar Brown report came out. I asked Shea about Richard Anderson, and he kind of gave a little more detail as to what's going on there with Anderson.
Yeah, look, so we're in a dead period, so recruits can't go face-to-face. He didn't get a chance to meet with Lane on Sunday when Lane arrived. But other people, look, there's agents involved, but it's very well known. Bryce Brown is one of the most recognizable head coaches in high school football in Louisiana. He's been a long-time Edna Carr coach. He's got a lot of connections in New Orleans, a lot of kids on LSU's team right now, but also multiple commits to LSU. You've got Richard Anderson, the #1 D lineman, a 5-star on Rivals, one of LSU's commits. You've also got Aiden Hall, who's a 4-star safety committed. what does the future hold for Aiden Hall? That's a question to add to the whole thing with what happens with Richard Anderson. And yes, I do think it centers around them wanting to know, A, who is the position coach? Can you give us any indication? B, what does the future hold for Frank Wilson, who more or less spearheaded the recruitment of New Orleans kids who are coming out of schools like Carr and Ogg? And all of these are fair questions to ask. I just don't know if Kiffin will be able to give them those answers. So it's fluid right now. Like, I do believe Richard Anderson wants to play at LSU, but there's also this reality that things have changed staff-wise from where they were before, and how does that change his approach to it? Because, look, Frank's the interim head coach. That's through the bowl game. Well, Matt, what happens in January if Frank gets let go? Does that impact current players because the portal's about to open? Does that impact the recruits you're signing right now, who then might immediately hit the portal? I think that Edna Carr, Bryce Brown, the people around them, their parents are just trying to avoid any more hurdles that could be put in place for their sons. So that going for, deep conversations with Lane, any conversation about, hey, where are we at? What does the future hold? And what should we do here? Because if not, we are going to need to delay this until we have more answers. And I think it's fair for both sides. Like I said, it's just the situation we're in. When you're hiring a new staff, you haven't publicly fired anyone from the old staff. Those guys are still in the ops building working too. And sort of simultaneously, you're putting together a signing class of the Ole Miss staff and who they want and have been recruiting, and then the LSU staff who has put together this class from the start.
We're going to get to some more of what Shea had to say there when he talked about the Ole Miss class that they put together and some of the recruits, because there was a lot of flips on Tuesday on the eve of signing day, and we'll get into some of the particulars there as well. You heard Shea mention Bryce Brown, who is the head coach at Edna Carr, and I did text with Bryce Brown on Tuesday, and I'll read this specifically when I asked Coach Brown if he could shed any light on the Richard Anderson situation. And what Coach Bryce Brown texted to me is, I'm reading his text messages. I think the moving parts and uncertainty with certain staff members have made the situation more complex than we initially thought. Timing of this is unfortunate, but it's my job to protect the players at my school. Richard will take his time and try to get to know this current staff. So very similar there from the two different sources close to Richard Anderson that I spoke with, including his high school coach, Bryce Brown. It doesn't mean they're flipping. It just, he or Lamar Brown, Bryce Anderson Richard Anderson or Lamar Brown. It just means that they're not going to sign on Wednesday while they get a little more clarity. It is worth mentioning that just a little less than 2 weeks ago, Richard Anderson was taking an official visit to the University of Texas. And the University of Texas, their edge coach is LaAllen Clark. And LaAllen Clark is a Baton Rouge native, lettered for 2 seasons at Northwestern State, finished his playing career at Grambling State, and got into coaching and has done a fantastic job. He spent the 2022 season coaching at Southern University. Prior to that, he was at Prairie View, then went to Ohio State in 2023 and 2024. And now in 2025, he joined the Texas football staff. So you're talking about a guy that's ascended very rapidly, and a guy from Baton Rouge who played high school and college football in Louisiana, coached at Southern, knows Baton Rouge well, and is now trying to make some connections there with some high-level Louisiana defensive linemen who he's trying to get to flip to the University of Texas. So just something to keep an eye on there. It is worth mentioning that both Richard Anderson and Lamar Brown have the same representation, same agent representation. So I think the conversation with Lamar Brown is very similar to the conversation with Richard Anderson. And obviously part of that conversation is the coaching staff, which I'll touch on when we come back. And I also want to give you sort of an overview of the flips and everything that happened on Tuesday and why. And Shea Dixon goes into a little more detail there, what the plan is moving through Thursday and also toward the portal in January. I'll tie it all together. Don't you leave. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place live bets on the action as it unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, the defense tightens up, the momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, which I love. A lot of times you can get value on a line after the game kicks off. At opening drive, you'll see a line shift. Maybe that half a point makes a gigantic difference. Player props update as guys heat up. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. And we're also brought to you by Our Lady of the Lake, championship health partner of LSU Athletics. You know, when Baton Rouge calls, champions answer. As Coach Kiffin takes the helm, energy is building, excitement is in the air. But next season's work starts now, behind the scenes, every day, on and off the field. As championship health partners of LSU Athletics and FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake providers, they're in the huddle, keeping students and teams healthy, supporting campus life, and preparing everyone for what's ahead. From checkups to training to day-to-day care, the focus is on giving their best when it matters most. As Coach Kiffin settles in and our city welcomes him in, one thing is clear. The next play starts now, and Louisiana is ready. FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake, and LSU. Championship Health Partners. Learn more at ololrmc.com/LSU. So it was a pretty crazy day of flips around the LSU class, both in and out, which we'll touch on here in a second. But I know there's a lot of conversation and questions that I've been getting about Frank Wilson, and there are some crazy internet rumors. I don't believe any of that. There have been words thrown around like sabotage. I can't help but think of when Frank Wilson was introduced as the interim coach at LSU and was so eloquent in explaining his love for LSU and Louisiana and the program and what it means for the state. I can't bring myself to believe that Frank Wilson would sabotage the LSU football program. It just sounds silly to even say it. But whenever you think logically of what's happening, something we've explained, and shout out to our everydayers in the previous episode where we talked about the decision Blake Baker may have to make depending on what happens with the Tulane job. We also discussed Frank Wilson, and just a very quick Cliff Notes catch up if you missed that. So Lane Kiffin, his longtime running backs coach is Kevin Smith, who was with him at FAU for 3 years and then all 6 years at Ole Miss. So he's been with Lane Kiffin for 9 seasons. And Lane wants Kevin Smith to come to Baton Rouge. But Kevin Smith didn't get on the plane Sunday. Now, Monday, Kevin Smith's wife was in Baton Rouge, sort of on a reconnaissance mission, kind of like what Layla Kiffin did last month or two Mondays ago. And we'll see how this all ends up playing out and transpiring. But if Kevin Smith joins LSU staff, then Frank Wilson isn't going to be the running backs coach. And George McDonald already joined the LSU staff under Kiffin as the receivers coach. So you're running out of spots of what Frank Wilson would coach. And as I understand it, Coach Frank is not going to accept an off the field, like analyst role or front office role. He wants to be coaching on the field. So it's complicated this as to where Coach Frank fits. So these guys that are very closely connected with Frank Wilson want to know if he's going to be there. And so they're waiting on that decision. That's a decision Lane Kiffin can't yet give. Now, specifically for Richard Anderson and Lamar Brown, Anderson is interior defensive lineman, and Kyle Williams is LSU's defensive line coach. I think there's a very real question as to whether or not Kyle Williams will continue as LSU's defensive line coach. And it's not because Lane Kiffin would force him out or Blake Baker or anything along those lines. I don't know that Kyle Williams is eager to continue coaching. That seems to be a lot of the conversation. I mean, he's a guy that played 13 NFL seasons. When he retired, he was coaching football at his alma mater at Ruston. He was playing golf every day at Squire Creek. He was watching his kids, who are his daughter's competitive soccer player. His son's an 8th grader now at the Dunham School in Baton Rouge. And when you're running 10, 12-hour days in the football facility, there ain't a lot of time to play golf and spend time with your kids. So, and then this season was so tumultuous, from great expectations to the bottom falling out. It just sounds like around the program, maybe Kyle Williams doesn't want to continue coaching college football. And if that's the case, then you're looking for a new defensive line coach. So then Richard Anderson doesn't know who his position coach is going to be. And similarly, as we talked about in the Baker episode, if Blake Baker gets the Tulane job, it's my understanding he would take Jake Olson and Kevin Peoples with him. Olson is the safeties coach and Peoples is the defensive end or edge coach at LSU. That's the position Lamar Brown's going to play. So there's a chance that both of those guys don't know who their position coach is going to be, and Frank Wilson potentially might not be on staff. So I can understand them taking their time to see how this plays out. There's no reason to sign if they want to hold off to gain and gather more information. It's one of the real disservices that the calendar does, again, to these young people trying to make these life-altering decisions, is especially when there's a coaching change. You're talking about having 48 hours to make that decision before you sign a piece of paper determining where you're going to go to school. I can certainly understand them wanting to take their time and doing their due diligence. Now, there was a good bit of activity on Tuesday. LSU added 2 players with the likelihood of a third, and they saw 3 players leave the class. So we'll give you the rundown of exactly where the LSU class stands right now in just a second. But let's talk first about the players that are out of the class. The first is Jalen Chapman, who is an offensive lineman out of Warren Easton, who was the lowest rated player committed to the class. I want to remind you of something that Lane Kiffin said at his press conference on Monday when he was asked about National Signing Day and the portal plan and everything. Remember what he said?
We have big picture thinking too. So we're not reaching or we're not signing kids because they're from this school or that school or any of that stuff. Okay? We're going to sign the best players that we can on Wednesday, then go to the portal, which I have zero concern about the interest of players with that. Because I know what the interest was of players nationally to come play for us where we were just at. And now when you put that with this stadium, with that logo, I mean,
We got time for 2 more rap and then Ross.
makes me want to go get on the phone right now, but the portal's not open.
You can tell a couple of things. One, he is very excited about the portal. I'll give you some more context in that in just a second. But think about the first thing he said there. We're not gonna just sign players to sign players. We have big picture thinking, and we're not going to sign a player just because they went to a school. So I think you look at Jalen Chapman. He was processed out of this class. On Sunday, Jalen Chapman tweeted, "Great day to be a Tiger." 48 hours later, he's decommitting. Well, you can read the writing on the wall there. And Shea Dixon told us the same was true with Kenny Darby, who's a high 4-star wide receiver, but it's very clear that Lane Kiffin has his own vision of that position.
This was another one where the new staff just said, hey, look, we're going to go in a different direction. And it's Kenny Darby had been shut down his recruitment multiple times. He had Bama and many others interested in him over the summer. He had stood firm with this commitment. And we can talk about this. There's a wave of receivers that I do think they add here. So the decision to not sign Kenny Darby and in turn Kenny Darby have to reopen his process will lead to him. And he's got some other options. He found out about things and quickly coaches have reached out. So he'll find a landing spot, but it will not be at LSU, which we did not anticipate before today. And I can say the same for a lot of what's going on. And I can tell you, Matt, I haven't experienced this where you have a staff change, because it wasn't like that with Orgeron. It was really a continuation of the staff with some guys let go. At least on offense, this is more wholesale. We don't know the future of the defensive staff, and you've got opinions, rightfully so, right? You've hired Lane Kiffin. You've allowed him to hire a staff. Those guys get to make the decisions now. So we're just seeing I don't want to call it the fallout, but the results of those decisions playing out right before signing day, which is just not something you're used to. So I said it earlier this week. I got a feeling that the signing class was going to look a lot different than it did to start the week, and that's very much proving to be the case here.
So think here, again, Lane Kiffin, brilliant offensive guy, and he's evaluating LSU's class and who will be in it and who won't. He's evaluating the Ole Miss class, who he'd like to be in it. So if you're scoring at home, 2 current LSU receivers, Kylan Billiot and Jelani Watkins, have announced their intention to enter the portal. Kenny Darby, who had been committed to LSU and firmly committed for some time, was processed out of the class. And then Kervin Johnson, who is a more recent commit from LSU, flipped, incidentally, to Ole Miss. So Watkins, Billiot, Darby, Johnson, that's 4 receivers, 2 current, 2 committed, that are processed out of the program. Meanwhile, LSU is expected to gain the commitment of Braden Allen, the Oklahoma transfer who decommitted from Oklahoma. It's expected to flip to LSU. And then Corey Barber, they gained his commitment. And then Corey Barber is a receiver who had been committed to Ole Miss, who decommitted and now is expected to land in the LSU class as well. So you can see how that's going. And then remember the other part we just played for you from Lane Kiffin, the transfer portal. I think it stands to reason that you very likely will have players from Ole Miss who do enter the transfer portal and end up at LSU, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a player or players in that receiver room. So Chapman, Darby, Kervin Johnson, all decommitting. Richard Anderson, Bryce Brown delaying their decisions. The Tigers picked up a couple of commits, as we mentioned, from Braden Allen and tight end J.C. Anderson from the Ole Miss class, and an offensive lineman from Ole Miss who had been committed, now is flipped into LSU's class as well. That's Ryan Mirette. He's an interior offensive lineman out of Miami, Florida, who had been committed to Ole Miss. So again, LSU has an Ole Miss receiver or tight end and offensive lineman flip into the class, an offensive lineman and a couple of receivers out of the class. So you're kind of scoring at home. That's what it's doing with the numbers. So let me do this. Quick step aside. We'll come back and I'll give you the full recap of the numbers and what we're expecting on National Signing Day to wrap up. Locked on LSU, your team every day. So as it stands right now, LSU, as we record this, there haven't been any more flips or anything of that right now. LSU presently sits on 15 commitments. Okay. That's with Chapman, Darby, and Johnson out of the class. And then with the tight end, J.C. Anderson, who's a 4-star, and the offensive lineman, Ryan Mirette, who's a 3-star, coming into the class, along with wide receiver Braden Allen out of Lafayette Christian. So 3 out on Tuesday, 3 in, and we're still expecting that Corey Barber will join the class as well. So you're at 15 commits right now, and 13 of those 15 are expected to sign on Wednesday. The 2 that aren't expected to sign are your top 2 prospects, Lamar Brown and Richard Anderson. Now, here's what I do think is interesting about this class. While the numbers aren't robust, it is still at 15 commits. You are still talking about when you're looking at an average player ranking. So LSU's class right now ranks 11th, but the average player ranking for LSU is at a 91.882. That still puts LSU close to the top nationally whenever you're talking about the average player ranking in this class. Now, if you don't get Richard Anderson or Lamar Brown, that's going to drop significantly. But it's important to note how Lane Kiffin, the self-appointed portal king, is building his roster. And I want to share a note that I got from a source within the LSU football program on Tuesday. And this person still believes Wednesday is going to be a great day for LSU as you land a lot of these players. And understanding it's a bit tense right now around football ops because you have 2 different staffs. You have the existing staff and then the incoming staff. And in this critical juncture where they're trying to put a roster together with signing day, you have the guys who've been working so hard on this class, and then the new staff comes in with full autonomy to blow it up if they want, because it's a new staff, and Lane Kiffin is going to make those decisions ultimately. So we'll see what happens. What role might you carve out for Frank Wilson? What happens with Blake Baker? Does he take the Tulane job if it's offered? Is he back at LSU? So all of those things still need to settle, and they will in time. But the note I got that was so interesting was that it's becoming clear the portal window will be supremely important, more so than Wednesday, this person notes, and also says, and I suspect Lane will do very well there, given the available treasure chest. I want to remind you again, the question that I asked Lane Kiffin in his press conference Monday about the true NIL funds available and how big of a deal that was for Lane Kiffin taking the job, what a differentiator that was between LSU and the other schools that were pursuing Lane Kiffin. And with his reputation as the portal king, self-appointed portal king, it stands to reason that, yes, he is going to be heavily focused on the transfer portal and guys that can be immediate impact guys. Instead of signing 30 high school players and waiting 3 years from the grow and develop, go get the best players in the country in the portal who want to play at LSU, make good money, and play for Lane Kiffin. And that's going to be a real focus. So don't expect great numbers on Wednesday. Expect quality over quantity. Remember, Lane Kiffin said, not going to sign guys just to sign guys or because of where they went to school. We're going to be selective, and then they're going to go ham in the portal. That January portal window is going to prove to be even bigger than Wednesday's signing day. And of course, we'll be talking about it here all the way through on Locked On LSU. So please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 podcast network in the world. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked On LSU. It's your team every day.